Boy, do I feel good. The Secret Rings apocalypse is over, Elise is dead or something, and now I can finally move on to the best part of the game, Shadow's story. Not only that, but I can finally really go into depth into his character. God, I'm so happy. I had a mix of positive and negative in the other videos on this game, but this! What was that? That's right, ladies, gents, non-binaries, and anyone else I'm forgetting. Today, we're finishing up the main campaigns of Sonic 06 by going into depth on Shadow's story. The story itself definitely has the coolest opening, which makes sense for how Sega wants to characterize Shadow. He's supposed to be a badass, and this cutscene holds nothing back on that front. We're seeing gunfire, searchlights, and EGG robots left and right. Once Shadow gets behind enemy lines, we find out he's working with the GUN. Apparently they sent Rouge on a mission into Eggman's base 26 hours ago, and are only now sending someone to rescue her. And again, knowing how easily distracted Rouge gets by shiny things, I can understand why they would give her a little extra time. Shadow teleports further into the base, and we get to his first level. Shadow definitely has the best gameplay out of any character in the game. He's a bit slower than Sonic, but he makes up for it with his attacks. First of all, his kicks and slides have a much wider range to hit enemies. You can also use Chaos Spear whenever you feel like it. Finally, his homing attack is very interesting here. You can't really do an action chain with it like Sonic, but you can use it in a different way to defeat enemies. Instead of just hitting them, going back and hitting them again, Shadow can stay suspended in midair and continuously hit the enemy until they fall. Shadow is a perfect mix of Sonic and Silver's gameplay, being able to traverse areas extremely quickly while also being able to take down an insane amount of enemies. Once again, this level follows a similar formula to Sonic, but this one is even more unique than Silver's story. Instead of snowboarding, you're running with Shadow, but since Shadow can take on a lot more enemies than Blaze can, there are a lot more enemies. These enemies are also quite a bit stronger than the normal EGG robots. How do I know this? They're colored differently, and that always means they're stronger. After the snowboarding section, we finally find Rouge and bust her out of the prison cell she's in. Rouge's gameplay is a lot like Knuckles' gameplay, except it's actually playable and not terrible. Rouge also has the ability to throw bombs, like Tails. She gets used a lot in Shadow's story, which makes sense considering she's his right hand. This section is like Tails' section, except security is really tightened in this area. There are a lot more laser gates, and there are a shit ton of enemies, even without getting seen by any of the searchlights. Still, it's a great introduction to Rouge's style of gameplay, which is definitely needed because even if the player has completed Sonic's story, we play as Knuckles so little that we still aren't entirely accustomed to Rouge's style of gameplay. The final gameplay section is what makes Shadow's story the best rendition of White Acropolis, though. There's another aspect of Shadow's gameplay I haven't mentioned yet: vehicular manslaughter! That's right, the annoying gimmick in this story is getting in a tank and absolutely going ape shit on any enemies who are unlucky enough to be nearby. To end the level off, you have to destroy all 5 of the searchlights scattered around the area, making this go from a stressful stealth section where you have to rush to the end to an extremely fun war zone where you can just kind of blast through the enemies. Another thing to note here is that none of the other characters can actually destroy the searchlights. The best you can do is break the lights to shut them off. This makes the last sequence with them even more satisfying. After the level, Rouge shows Shadow the new toy that she was able to get from Eggman's base. I'm not going to ask where she was carrying it during the level, because knowing this fan base, I'm not going to like the answer. Shadow doesn't really care about Rouge or her research, though. He's a purely business-responsible little emo bean boy, and we love him for that. Before they can get back to HQ, though, Shadow and Rouge are attacked by Cerberus. Cerberus is the first boss of Shadow's story. It doesn't change much from its appearance in Sonic's story, though, and I already covered this boss fight in that video. So instead of just repeating myself, here's my guide for a completely different boss fight. Nightmare King Grim can be really tricky, especially for new players, even after you've gotten practice for this fight from normal Grim. This is still a hellscape though. While no matter what you do, you're not going to defeat NKG on your first attempt, here are some pointers. First of all, have as many charm notches as possible. You'll need to be pretty stacked up for this, and to even get to the fight you need Grimchild equipped. The most useful charm here for me is Shape of Un. If you don't already have it, you can find it in the Lake of Un and Green Path. You need Isma's Tear to get past the acidic waters, but if you're actually this far into the game without Isma's Tear, I'm more impressed than anything else. Quick Focus also really helps here, because not only does it let you heal faster, but you move a lot faster in slug form as well. For whatever remaining notches you have, pretty much any charm works here. I wouldn't recommend Sharp Shadow or Heavy Blow though, because these can actually put you at a major disadvantage. Lastly, never overcharm in this fight. NKG already does 2 mass per attack, and you do not want to double that. After defeating Cerberus, Rouge gives Shadow a little bit of background information on Soliana. Shadow realizes that he's going to have to be here for a while, so he might as well listen to her. There actually is some interesting world building here, but unfortunately it's never fully fleshed out in the game. If this game were open world! Rouge tells Shadow that she got a message from GUN to meet them in Kingdom Valley, so they head over there to meet them. This isn't a revolutionary detail or anything, but I think it's cool that instead of putting you in the Soliana Forest immediately, the game actually spawns you right outside of the White Acropolis Gate. It then has you go all the way over to the Soliana Forest. Shadow's story is the only one that you don't have to do the trials to unlock Kingdom Valley in. GUN is doing them for you. And as much as I'd love to see Abraham Tower doing the Trial of Love, that all happens off screen. This is where I should mention Shadow's most useful move. This is the one that the game revolves around, Chaos Boost. Whenever you fill up Shadow's energy meter by defeating enemies or collecting items, you can enter Chaos Boost mode. Shadow then gets a red aura around him and becomes way stronger. There's not much particularly different about this form other than that though. It would have been cool if they threw in some new moves, or even just made already existing moves more efficient. Like, for example, whenever you use Chaos Sphere, instead of just launching one sphere, you launch 3. You can use this new ability to destroy a grouping of rubble in front of a cave. The cave has a portal to Kingdom Valley, as all caves do. Shadow's version of this level absolutely proves to me why this is my favorite level in the game, though. It starts out in a new vehicle, the Glider. This one is pretty simple, just fly around and try not to get hit. The setting of this area, though, is absolutely top-notch. Flying through the first part of Kingdom Valley really shows how vast it is. This was clearly the level that had the most heart put into it by the team. It's just stunning. It's absolutely beautiful. The next part of the level has you playing as Rouge for a bit. In this part of the level, you need to search for keys to get further in. It's a lot like the Emerald searching stages in Sonic Adventure 2, except a bit more broken. While the mission itself is all well and good, and honestly exploring Kingdom Valley is always something I'll gladly do, Rouge gets stuck a lot. Especially in this level though. I've never had that many issues with Rouge getting stuck to walls outside of here. Maybe it's because the walls in this area are so flat, but without fail I always get stuck to a wall for 30 seconds at least once in this level. After getting all the keys, we get to the third vehicle, the Hover Bike. This lets Shadow go above the water while also shooting down enemies. Be careful though, because enemies aren't the only things you can shoot down here. The buildings are super old, and hitting them can cause them to fall over. If they fall on you, you're going for a swim. Again, just going through here in a vehicle like this really shows to me how vast this area really is. Maybe I just love Aquatic Ruins, but it really does look pretty. The final area in this level is a lot like Silver's section, just fighting enemies until you get to the goal. I like how even though this is one of the earlier levels in Shadow's story, they don't make it way easier than it should be. The level is still pretty difficult, but with Shadow's gameplay you're still able to get through it, without it feeling like it's too hard. When Shadow and Rouge make it to the meetup point, I don't know how to spell rendezvous, they find out it was a setup. Eggman actually sent Rouge the message, and disguised himself as GUN. You'd think they would have strong enough safeguards that Eggman couldn't just do that, but then again, this is a military that never took steps to decommission a massive moon-pissing laser, so I'll let this slide. Eggman attempts to get the Scepter of Darkness back from Shadow, but his fatal mistake is only bringing base EGG robots. He should have known that the only way to stop Shadow was with Chaos Androids or Neo Metal Sonic. We get a cool scene where Shadow has to choose between saving Rouge or catching the Scepter of Darkness. Even though Shadow is all business now and pretends to be cold, deep down he still cares about Rouge a lot, and he prioritizes her life over the Scepter. Eggman isn't entirely sure what the Scepter of Darkness actually contains. He had done scans on both it and the Flames of Disaster with an Elise at this point. The Flames were aggressive, they were violent and ruthless. This was to be expected, but the Scepter of Darkness was different. It was calm. It held nothing but thought and anger within itself. Though it was decidedly less dangerous than the Flames of Disaster, there was something even more terrifying about how little aggression there was. When Eggman saw it fall and shatter, he knew whatever was about to be released wasn't good. A shadow erupted from the broken vessel, like a wraith. It made its way into the sky. As it was released, all of Eggman's machines were paralyzed. This paralysis wasn't caused by a malfunction or a loss of power. Though their capacity for emotion was very limited, they were instantly paralyzed with fear simply by the danger this presence held. Eggman wasn't the type to just flee, but this scenario was one he knew he wouldn't be able to continue thriving in. So he pulled back. The Wraith destroys Eggman's machines and then dives into Shadow's own shadow, using it to create a form for himself. Mephiles resembles the devil. His name is inspired from Mephistopheles, an incarnation of the devil who would tempt souls with the promise of bottomless pleasure, only to cast them into hell for eternity. His eyes are reptilian, and he moves in an uncanny and inhuman way. Not only that, but while Mephiles takes on a more creepy and disfigured form, He used to be a beautiful and angelic creature. Mephiles also has no care for anyone's boundaries. In fact, it brings him joy to make other people uncomfortable. Mephiles only truly desires mental superiority over others. While Iblis values physical superiority and being a mindless beast, Mephiles already knows he is a demigod, and can of course defeat almost anyone in battle. It only brings him small amounts of joy to mutilate and kill his enemies. He would much rather watch their mental state fall apart as they feel inferior to him in every way without having to lay a finger on them. Of all his adversaries, Mephiles neither hated nor respected any more than Shadow the Hedgehog. He quickly realized that this version of Shadow had not yet defeated him, though. This gave Mephiles an opportunity. He knew he couldn't immediately kill Shadow, or that could lead to a paradoxical consequence, which he didn't want to occur before he became Solaris again. So instead, he sent him to the ruined future so he could deal with him later. Another thing to note about Mephiles is that he's extremely classy, along with his uncanniness. Though he almost immediately knew that this version of Shadow hadn't met him yet, he joked by asking, "Did you forget me?" This makes sense considering his goals regarding Shadow aren't annihilation, rather assimilation. He wants Shadow to watch as everything he loves disappears, and then force him to give in to his power and become one with him. In the ruined future, Rouge wastes no time. She immediately tells Shadow they need to figure out where they are and how to get back to Soliana. Shadow doesn't show it, but he was extremely shaken by what just happened. Mephiles had struck him in a way that no one had managed except for Black Doom. Just the sight of him taking his form, and the terror he felt by just seeing him, had triggered all of Shadow's negative senses at once. It didn't matter. He would find out who or what it was and put a stop to it immediately. After accessing a computer, Rouge informs Shadow that they're in the future. They're both a little shocked by this, but it's not entirely an impossibility. This makes Shadow even more uncomfortable. Now Mephiles has powers similar to Chaos Control, except somehow he may be even better at using it than he is. Before Shadow can tell this fully to Rouge though, they hear a loud noise behind them. Sonic and his group just so happen to appear in the exact same time period that they're in. After clearing everything up together, they head off to the next level, Crisis City. Alright, you all still with me? I know I went off about Mephiles for a while there, and knowing you guys, you probably want me to keep talking about him, but remember, there's almost a playable video game inside of this video game, so we have to talk about that as well. Shadow's version of Crisis City starts out with a snowboarding section yet again, except this time you're in a tank for it. Though I do prefer exploration, it's also fun to just blast through Iblis spawn like hell as you fight your way to the end. There are a lot more Goliaths in this area than there were when you were snowboarding with Sonic, which makes sense considering that you can do a lot more damage in the tank than on a snowboard. The next part of the level is basically just Sonic's section but with Shadow. Not a lot of changes here, but that's okay. Sometimes it's just nice to go back through a familiar area with a similar character. Adventure 1 did that shit all the time and no one complained about that, so you can't really knock this game for that either. After that we have another gliding section. I know this is not a defense of the game whatsoever, but it's funny, so who cares. This is the only gliding section in Shadow's story that you actually have to move in. Every other one you can stay completely still for the entirety of without dying. Even then, you can actually get pretty close in this one without moving as well. The last section of this level has you playing through Silver's end of Crisis City, but with Shadow. Shadow doesn't have psychic powers like Silver, so in order to get through here, you have to find alternative methods to get to higher spots. Sadly, most of these are still provided for you with springs or pull-uppy, the things that pull, the pull things that you pull and then you go up for pulling them. Yeah. It would have been cooler if there was no one right way to get up with Shadow, and the player had to force their own path up, but I digress. After the level, Rouge is admiring the beauty of the Chaos Emerald when she and Shadow come across the body of Omega. Omega is in standby mode at the moment, so the good news is that he isn't dead. Still, he's not going to be of any use until he decides to get his ass up. By the way, why wasn't the green emerald at the end of the level instead of the gold ring? We know from End of the World that Chaos Emeralds can be used as level complete markers, so why not just put the green emerald there instead of the gold? We then get to Shadow's version of Flame Core. Obviously, since Silver's version of Flame Core is the epic finale to his story, Shadow's version is inferior to it, but that doesn't stop it from being good by any means. The level is a lot like Sonic's version, almost down to the rhythm, except there is one blaring difference. Once you get inside of the volcano, in addition to Iblis spawn, Mephiles spawn is also a threat. For those of you who didn't watch the Silver video, Mephiles spawn is a lot like Iblis spawn, but even stronger and with some new abilities as well. After completing this level oh, yep, it's this boss again. I'm gonna be completely honest with you, one of the two reasons I did the Silver video before the Shadow video is because I didn't want to talk about this boss a second time. It doesn't even change in Shadow Story. It is the exact same fight, just as slow, just as tedious. Hate. Let me tell you how much I've come to hate you since I began to live. There are 387.44 million miles of printed circuits and wafer-thin layers that fill my complex. If the word hate was engraved on each nanogram of those thousands of hundreds of millions of miles, it would not equal 1/1 billionth of the hate I feel for humans at this micro instant for you. Hate. Hate. Okay, now that we're done with that shit, we can get on to the rest of Shadow's story, which, good news, is only good. I can't really think of a single bad thing that I would change here. Gameplay-wise and story-wise, it's incredible. So let's keep moving. After defeating Iblis Phase 2, Sonic and Shadow make a portal back to the present. As everyone else leaves though, Shadow sees Mephiles appear behind him. In this instance, Mephiles stands next to the flame of Iblis, proving that he is immortal. Shadow is filled with fear at the sight of him, but that fear is soon replaced by anger that whatever this thing was would have this much power over him, so he ran towards him. Rouge appears back at Soliana, but the portal closes behind her, without Shadow. She was sure that Shadow would have a reason for his actions, but even then, without a Chaos Emerald, his chances of coming back weren't looking good. So Rouge goes out to look for the one person who can help her at this point, Omega. We then get dropped directly into Rouge's version of Tropical Jungle. This one is really short because unlike Silver, Rouge has a lot of upward mobility. This is easily the shortest level in the game because the goal is incredibly close by and there's nothing stopping you from just going right to it. Once you defeat a couple enemies, you find Omega. Once Rouge finds Omega, she gives him a Chaos Emerald and... Wait a second. So if Omega had that emerald the entire time, then it would have been with him in the future. So how the hell is it just lying around in Crisis City? Well then again, Omega and Shadow do return with the emerald after the next boss fight, meaning... there were two variations of the green emerald this whole time! So anyways, Omega goes back to Soliana and then sits down for 200 years. That's why we find him in standby mode in Crisis City. Omega aside though, we can now get to the battle with... What is happening? Has this ever happened to you? People always tell me how much they hate it when their arms clip into furniture. It's terrible! Well, I have a solution for you. This Ultra Collision Cream will keep your arms exactly where they should be. Applying it is simple. Just take the bottle cap off, swallow it, and squeeze the cream out of the tube. Carefully rub down your arms to make sure the solution covers all of your skin. Then... and voila! You'll never clip again. Okay, I think it's fixed. Oh! There we go. Sorry, I have no idea what just happened there. Everything just went static for a second. Right. Moving on. Shadow confronts Mephiles, asking him if he's responsible for the desolation of this world. This is actually an interesting question. While the world would have ended whether Mephiles was freed or not, Iblis is technically a part of him. Mephiles then tries to lure Shadow in by showing him what he had been fearing, what he had become in this future. As it turns out, Abraham was still mad at Shadow after all, and after the day of disaster, he was killed by GUN. Mephiles tempts Shadow to join him and execute humanity. But Shadow has played this game before, and he knew better than to join up with Mephiles. He defeated Devil Doom. He defeated the one being that would be superior to him, and he wouldn't let anyone be superior to him ever again. If the world chose to be his enemy, he would fight, win, and then all would hail Shadow. It seemed that Shadow wouldn't realize his inferiority through words alone, so Mephiles shed his more relatable and attractive form, and prepared to show Shadow the demon he truly was. We now get one of the best boss fights in the game, Mephiles Phase 1. The first part of this fight has Mephiles constantly mocking Shadow while also taking the form of his shadow. There's no way to hurt Mephiles in this state, and his spawn are surrounding you. I love the way Mephiles acts here. He's still not letting go of making Shadow feel inferior mentally by keeping him from being able to hurt him. The only way to hurt him is to enter Chaos Boost mode. That's only possible by defeating Mephiles spawn that surrounds you. Even while you're doing this, Mephiles further discourages you by telling you it doesn't matter how many of them you defeat. Once you enter Chaos Boost, Mephiles is forced out of you. At this point, Mephiles really wants to see what you're made of. He makes his spawn even more aggressive and also attacks you directly using Clouds of Darkness. Shadow doesn't stand a chance here. Mephiles is ruthless in making sure Shadow realizes Mephiles could kill him at any moment. He lets Shadow hit him a few times just to show him how little damage he's doing, even at his highest. Once he grows bored of it, Mephiles blasts Shadow back. He then walks towards him. If Omega hadn't intervened here, Shadow may have been forced into Mephiles' deal. You can see his facial expression when he hits the pillar behind him. That face is one of more than just physical pain. Mephiles' plan was working. Shadow felt completely inferior to Mephiles, completely at his will. Shadow may have become something else entirely. Omega does show up to help Shadow though. We now get the first time we can play as Omega in this game, and he plays pretty well. Unlike the okay mech stages in Sonic Adventure 1, or the really bad mech stages in Sonic Adventure 2, Omega probably plays just as good, if not better, than Gamma. The only drawback is you can't always see where Omega is aiming, but you're going to want to destroy everything on screen anyways, so just go ham. Omega can also hover like Gamma can. A trick for this is instead of holding the jump button like you do with Gamma, you'll want to repeatedly press it to get better distance, because Omega, believe it or not, is pretty damn heavy. You can tell Mephiles is getting frustrated at this point. His defense increases by a lot, and he attacks much more frequently. He also constantly berates Omega, like he does with Shadow, but he's much more aggressive with his insults. Even though Mephiles could destroy them both here, that would require a lot of energy he doesn't have at the moment, so he retreats to the present. Shadow and Omega follow him, but end up in a different location. When they get back to the present, they meet up with Rouge again. At this point, Shadow is extremely shaken. Not only that, but he feels ashamed of himself. He couldn't do anything against Mephiles' power. He just wasn't strong enough. His only thought was maybe trying to use his full power, but he wasn't sure just yet if it was worth risking to kill himself to defeat Mephiles. No, not that. Not yet. He must have had some sort of weakness, something he could exploit. He needed to know more, and at that moment there wasn't anyone who knew more about Mephiles except... Shadow headed off. He really was grateful to both Omega and Rouge for the help, but he didn't know how to say it or how to show it. No. He could find the words later. We now get Shadow's version of Radical Train. Here, Shadow has to chase down Eggman's train, but he doesn't want to just stop it. For all Eggman's put him through by causing him to break the Scepter of Darkness in the first place, Shadow was going to break one of his toys, so we have to chase down the train to destroy it. Later in the level, during Sonic's running section, we have to get on a motorcycle to chase after the train and shoot it down, which is just so badass. Unlike in Sonic's story where it just kind of falls apart, here we're actually gunning that motherfucker down. Once Shadow makes it up to Eggman's train, he makes him talk. Eggman only tells Shadow that the answer can be found 10 years ago. Before Shadow leaves though, Eggman tells Shadow that once he captures Mephiles, if he wants to make sure he stays contained, he needs to give Mephiles back to Eggman. Shadow was really tired of people trying to use him though, so he just left without saying a word. As Shadow is heading back to Soleanna, he runs into Silver, who's attempting to kill Sonic. He stands in his way. He isn't sure exactly who this is, but after everything, after all he's been through, he's not going to have another person screw things up for him later. Sonic thanks him and runs off. Silver then confuses Shadow for Mephiles. This makes Shadow almost cringe when he hears it. So it looks like he wasn't the only one that Mephiles wore his face in front of. We now have the Shadow vs. Silver fight. It's a lot like the fight in Sonic's story, except a little bit harder. The only thing that makes it harder is the trains though. Chaos Boost unfortunately doesn't make you immune to Silver's power, but if you could beat Sonic's version of the fight, you can beat Shadow's version of the fight. After this fight, we get what is by far the best kick in the entire Sonic series. Honestly, that was just Shadow blowing off steam though. Sometimes when you're in a bad mood, you really just need to kick someone in the back of the head. Shadow realizes pretty quickly though that Silver is only acting this way because he was tricked. So he decides to bring him back to the past with him so they can learn the origin of Mephiles together. I already went over this cutscene in Silver's video, so something something, Birth of Two Gods, this guy's gonna die, shit ass is here. Anyways, Aquatic Base. In Sonic and Silver's version of the level, it felt more like exploring the base. This time though, it feels like a race to get to the end while the base is on lockdown. You still have to defeat a bunch of enemies, but this time there are a lot more Mephiles spawn, especially Goliaths and worms. As you go through the level though, more and more doors will close in front of you. Breaking them actually takes a while, so you'll want to be quick and get behind them. This level also has a shit ton of laser gates. There's also no giant ball puzzle in this level, so yay for that. I think the reason there are so many more safeguards here though is because even though Mephiles is smaller and even though he can't destroy the world in just a few days like Iblis can, He's definitely still the more dangerous one, so the guards of Soliana wanted to keep him contained at all costs. Shadow then catches up to Mephiles. He uses Chaos Control to hold him in place, and then seals him inside the Scepter of Darkness. Shadow only realizes what he's done when it's too late. Mephiles promises Shadow he will remember his form, and he will destroy him in the future. Shadow not only ensured that in the future Mephiles would return with a grudge against him, but also taught him Chaos Control. He had mixed feelings about this. On the one hand, he triumphed over Mephiles in the past, but on the other hand, this is the youngest, weakest form of Mephiles he'll ever fight. The Mephiles he's fighting now is much stronger than this one ever was. Shadow knows that the only way to seal Mephiles is with the Scepter, the only way he can stop Mephiles from destroying the world, and proving he isn't inferior. After making his way back to the present again, Shadow tells Rouge he needs to find a way to rebuild the Scepter of Darkness. Luckily, an archaeologist happens to be walking nearby. This is how Shadow learns there's an extra one in Soliana. However, in order to get this information off of the archaeologist, we have to, like in Silver's story, guide her to another part of Soliana while defeating enemies. And she moves so slowly. Not as slow as the other one, but still so fucking slowly. At least Shadow's combat is more enjoyable than Silver's. So once we get that, we can make our way to Wave Ocean, where Omega is battling Mephiles. Shadow's version of Wave Ocean starts out with another gliding section. It follows Sonic's running section, but of course makes it look and feel a lot bigger. Because this isn't Crisis City, if you don't move and shoot all the enemies, you won't die. Then we can get fully accustomed to Omega's gameplay. We play through a bit of Sonic's first section, but with just so many enemies. Omega is a tank though, and he can blast through Mephiles spawn like they're nothing. Also, for a machine this heavy, Omega can definitely grind on rails. We get another section with the Shadow where we destroy enemies, and we can actually hoverbike in the Orca Whale chase section. It's cool that there's actually an explorable area here that gets fleshed out in the Shadow story. Unlike in Sonic and Silver's story, we rush right past this area because there's a giant whale. After defeating more spawn, we get to meet up with Omega. Mephiles is tormenting Omega by telling him how Shadow dies in the future. He tells Omega that he murders Shadow. He doesn't even get reprogrammed by GUN to do it. He just murders him completely willingly. This could be a lie. This could just be something Mephiles tells Omega to freak him out. But I think what Mephiles is saying actually holds a lot of merit here. First, Omega's reaction is extreme. Instead of just brushing him off or saying he would never do that, Omega pulls out the miniguns and rips into Mephiles. Secondly, we know Omega is an extremely violent machine. Though Shadow and Omega have a strong bond with each other, with Shadow under so much stress from being chased around, and with how irrationally Omega can be when he's angry, what would it take to break that bond? When Omega guns Mephiles down, Mephiles doesn't fall because he's hurt. In fact, he's even laughing as he disappears. In this instance, if Mephiles wanted to, he could have turned Omega into a bunch of scrap metal and disconfigured bullets. Mephiles doesn't do things that way though. It's kind of like how Eggman Action and Force is. Instead of just killing Sonic, he wanted to make Sonic face an ultimate defeat by showing him his army, making him realize he and everything he cared about were doomed, and then sending him into space. This wouldn't have really worked though, considering hedgehogs can breathe in space. The damage is done though. Dread hangs over Shadow, now knowing even if he does defeat Mephiles, Omega could still come for him later. The world will hate him, the future will be ruined by Iblis, and even if somehow he manages to overcome all of that, Mephiles is a time traveler. He could appear in the future again, even if it's just to mock him, even if it's to make him something else entirely, even if it's to kill him. There was no winning here, was there? But there was. Rouge promised Shadow that even if everyone else in the world turned against him, she would remain by his side. In that moment, Shadow could feel the lightest touch in his heart. Even if he felt terrible, just knowing he had a friend who would never leave him was enough to keep him standing. He was never good with words. He kept them within himself, but he thought that maybe just being cold and driving everyone away was what caused him this much suffering in the first place. After defeating more Mephiles spawn in Soliana, we learn that Mephiles is at the Dusty Desert, trying to get the second Chaos Emerald for himself. They had the Scepter of Darkness, they had each other. If they were ever going to defeat Mephiles, it was now. Shadow had seen the destruction that was caused by Mephiles without a single emerald at his side. If he had two of them at once, he had to be stopped now, no matter what. So they headed out. The first part of this level has one last hover bike section. In order to get to the desert ruins, we have to go through a bunch of pillars. It's not terribly difficult, just watch out for birds. I know the whole point of these videos is to go really in depth into everything, but just do the desert temple. Honestly, it's even more fun than Silver's version of Flame Core. There are no 8-ball puzzles, the sections with Omega are insanely fun, and it beats out both other versions of this level in a landslide. Once we get to the throne of the desert temple, it's too late. Mephiles has already arrived. Then again, since Mephiles can travel through time as easily as you can travel to your refrigerator, it's kinda cheating. Still, Mephiles makes this courtroom his own, telling Shadow that this is his last chance to join him. If not, it'll be over for each of them. Shadow doesn't try to defeat Mephiles' argument by singing his own praise, but instead by confronting Mephiles' character, telling him all he craves is destruction and control over Iblis. Mephiles would put Shadow in his place. He would make Shadow realize his mistake. Shadow would never join him if he had support from his friends. Luckily, he was considerate enough to bring them right to slaughter. Watching Rouge and Omega get torn to pieces would certainly break his will. Shadow would be his. If not, then he would forever drown in darkness. Mephiles Phase 2 is an experience. At the start of the battle, the entire area is his playground. He goes into the ground and summons his spawn to destroy you. If you thought that the Goliaths of Mephiles' army was bad, just wait until you see the Executors. Taking inspiration from Iblis' form, these creatures are nothing short of nightmarish. They're extremely powerful too, and did I mention there can be 4 of them on the battlefield at once? Like in Phase 1, the only way to damage Mephiles is to enter Chaos Boost mode. The only way to do that, though, is to destroy the Executors and take their Chaos energy. You have to destroy at least 5 of them to get enough energy, but they don't go down easy. They're only vulnerable when their eyes turn white to unleash laser strikes. If they aren't vulnerable, attacking is pointless. But once you've defeated 5 of them, the tables still aren't fully turned. Mephiles' defense is even stronger now, and his attacks hit hard. Not only that, but he can clone himself now. So if you can't get to him quick enough and your Chaos Boost runs out, this Sanctum becomes his yet again. For his final attack though, he creates a series of clones of himself and makes a stairwell up to his real form. This would be child's play for Sonic. Sonic could easily defeat them one by one until he gets to the true Mephiles. Shadow can't action chain though. He's so strong, he's almost a match for Mephiles. But in an act of mockery and dominion, Mephiles does the one thing that only Shadow can't combat. He proves to Shadow that he's not only inferior to himself, but even to Sonic. Shadow was created to be the ultimate life form, but whose image was he made in? No one but that of the true ultimate life form. He'd even said it himself. Sure, it sounded nice when he was confessing it right before death, but having to live with it, having to know he was just a faker. No, it was another trick. Sonic would never actually think something like that about him. No one would. He was his own self. He was Shadow the Hedgehog. He would prove how much he was worth. In an act of triumph, Shadow scaled each and every one of Mephiles' clones. He performed an action chain. It wasn't perfect, but it got him to him. In one empowering kick, Mephiles was on the ground. Mephiles began melting into a puddle of darkness. It was time to end this. Shadow got the Scepter of Darkness and sealed him from within. For a second, for a calming second, it was over. For just a moment, Mephiles was gone. But he was stronger than he had ever been before. He wouldn't be contained. He couldn't be contained. Mephiles was, as he always would be, invincible. The scepter shattered. Mephiles' power was overwhelming. It was as if his defeat had only made him stronger. No, his sealing had only made him stronger. Mephiles experiences time differently. In those few seconds where he was sealed, did he somehow manage to go to another time and grow his power even more? It didn't matter. Mephiles now had the power of 2 Chaos Emeralds, as well as his ever-growing darkness. He could bend time to his will, and with that power, no energy could defeat him. Mephiles had won. Unless... Mephiles may have dominion over darkness. He may have power of chaos. But darkness and chaos were what Shadow was born from. There was no greater fight than this. There was no greater goal. This was all or nothing. Even if it killed him, Shadow would show to Mephiles his true power. Shadow took off the rings that suppressed his power. The rings that kept him from exploding from how much energy he truly had. If the world chose to be Shadow's enemy, he would fight like he always had. No matter what, Rouge and Omega would be right by his side. He would show Mephiles what he truly was capable of here and now. No matter what anyone says, Shadow is the ultimate life form. There's still one more. One character who may not have an official story, but who has a story that must be told.